Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Kent Evans, and again, Lawson and I are going to give you the gift we give you occasionally, and that is, you don't have to listen to us the whole time. So you're welcome in advance for not having to listen to me and Lawson the entire time today, which, by the way, we're recording this on July 1st. So for those of you listening, welcome to the second half of your year. Hard to imagine 2022
Crazy.
is
Can't believe it.
Half over. We have two very special guests with us today on the recording. And so if you're doing something that is distracting you, you're going to want to pull over and stop because you're going to want to pay close attention to the next few minutes. Lawson, would you do me a favor and introduce our guests?
Yes, will I ever. So I'm super excited for today. I've been waiting on this for quite a while. Gary Chapman is an author, speaker, and counselor. He's got a passion for people and helping them form lasting relationships. You may have heard of him from his #1 best-selling author of the 5 Love Language series, and that has now been translated into 50 different languages, 20 million books over 30 years, and I am myself a personal benefactor of that book. It helped my marriage as a young man to Audrey. He's the director of marriage and family life consultants, and he's got radio programs on air, more than 400 stations. So check him out. Go to 5lovelanguages.com. That's the number 5, lovelanguages.com. If you somehow have no idea who Gary Chapman is, which is not possible. And then Clarence Shuler, his lifelong friend and man in his own right, the president and CEO of Building Lasting Relationships. Clarence, too, is a counselor, a diversity consultant, speaker. He has 10 books that he's authored. Just a few of them are, check this out, Winning the Race to Unity. Is racial reconciliation really working? I love this one. Keeping your wife your best friend. Love that. I'm going to get into that next, Clarence. Single and free to be me. He and his wife, Brenda, and by the way, Clarence, I looked on your website and saw you and Brenda in the video introducing yourselves. She seems fantastic. And they both reside in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I get to come in late October for a business meeting. So if you're around then, I would love to shake your hand and buy you a cup of coffee. Find out more about Clarence at clarenceshuler.com. Clarence, and then Shuler is SCHLER. SH. Yeah.
We were too poor. We couldn't put that C in her last name.
Too long. SHULER. Got it.
Well, Clarence and Gary, welcome to the show. I was mentioning before we got recording, I was at the Fatherhood Commission last year in Rome, Georgia, where you guys shared up on stage about your friendship. And I was blown away. I had no idea you guys had been friends that long. And what an amazing story. And now you've put all that friendship story into a brand new book, which for those of you who might be watching or looking at the picture, Hunter, if you want to grab a screenshot, this is their new book. It's called Life-Changing Cross-Cultural Friendships, How You Can Help Heal Racial Divides One Relationship at a Time. And thank you guys so much for putting the book together, and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Kent and Lawson.
Well, I had to start with one question because it's in your media kit and it's a little bit uncomfortable because I didn't know we were supposed to ask this, but Devin said we had to. Clarence, how did you get to be so handsome?
I don't think that's in there.
It's in the version I have.
I have to pay Devin later. But anyway, if I'm handsome, that's a God thing. So I don't think I have much to do with that. And
Maybe your wife Brenda slipped it into the media kit. I think she
could have. She
I think
could
she
have.
did that.
She could have. She is my best friend, so she could have.
Okay, that's not really in the kit.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Awesome.
That's so
Austin,
good.
why don't you get us started?
Yeah. So since our show focuses on fathers, tell us a bit first about your own families. How long you've been married, your children, grandchildren. Clarence, why don't you start us off?
Well, this month, since it's July, Brenda and I will be married 37 years. And Gary did our premarital counseling. He was the best man at our wedding. Even though I think as a groom, I think I was the best man. But anyway, I have 3 girls. I have twins who are 33, and the youngest, Andrea, is 32. At this point, we don't have any grandchildren. So that's us. That's our family.
Yeah, Carolyn and I have been married 60 years. So be coming up in August to 61 years.
Wow.
Now, she says that is impossible because she's only 49.
60,
and we
that's
have 2 children, a girl and a son, both of whom, of course, are old and married. Older, not old, but older. Married. And our daughter has our 2 grandchildren. She has a daughter and a son as well. One of them is finished college. The other will be a senior in college. So that's where our children are. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for doing that and helping our dads understand your own kind of fatherhood and parenting story. As we drop in, here's where we'd love to start with you guys. You guys became friends back in the 1960s. And that was the time of deep racial divides in our country, no question. And in your community in particular, and how you guys navigated desegregation as early friends. How did your budding friendship at the time prepare you guys to walk through that season?
Well, I was going to an all-black high school at the time, and my buddy was going to an integrated school. We used to call it a white school back then. And the girls at his church, we're going to the same church Gary was, invited them to the church, really a brand new gym. And we were in North Carolina. And in North Carolina, you have basketball, tobacco, and Baptist, pretty much in that order. And so so once he said he wanted to go, but he couldn't go by himself. So there was an unwritten rule that you never went to a white venue by yourself. So he got his parents' permission. My family actually had a family council to determine if I could go to a white church. And we were losing a battle. I was not a Christian, but I was in church. And I said, Jesus will be with us. That kind of turned the tide, and we got to go. And as soon as we got there, we crossed the railroad tracks, and people started throwing bottles, calling us names and stuff like that. But we got into the church. We're only 2 black kids there, about 100 kids. And but we were used to being minorities, so it wasn't a big deal, but I was concerned about how we were going to get out of there. And I went to the basketball court where I felt at home. Russell went to talk to his girls who were his friends, and Gary came on the court and introduced himself. And so that was kind of it. I don't know if our friendship prepared us to navigate desegregation because we were kind of dealing with that. But what was unusual about it was that we were in a white setting and we were relatively safe, which is unusual in North Carolina in 1968. And so for Gary to come over as an adult male and be friendly, initiate being kind was
right.
That was sort of shocking. It was pleasant, but it was shocking at the same time.
Yeah, and I think when they came in, I didn't know they were coming, and some of our adult leaders kind of looked at me and got pointed, do you see that, and I kind of raised my hand as if to say, it's okay. I mean, we were all trying to adjust to the integration thing, during those days. So at any rate, after we played some games and I gave a brief time with the kids, just talking to them and letting them ask questions and me asking them questions. But when it got time to go, I just said to both of them, I said, hey guys, we are here every Tuesday night and you guys are always welcome. And they started coming, and that's how our friendship developed. They just started coming every Tuesday night and we'd spend time together. And So sometimes I'd pick them up, sometimes they'd walk, sometimes somebody else would pick them up. But neither of us at that time thought that we would have a lifelong friendship, but we were obviously navigating the waters that were around us. We didn't create, the situation that was there in our country. We were just born. I was born white, he was born black, and the country was where it was. So, but I do think that, obviously looking back on it, God had a plan for our lives to intertwine. And we have enriched each other's life for all these years and helping us understand each other, understand different cultures, and then just grow together as, Christians.
Yeah, you two have been friends a long time. I love your story, and I've really enjoyed the book. You've released a book, Life-Changing Cross-Cultural Friendships, How You Can Help Heal Racial Divides One Relationship at a Time. And I think you two, your one relationship is the perfect example of people that think, what am I? I'm just one person, if I do what you guys in your book have called us to do, how's that going to matter? Well, you're a perfect example of how that has mattered and how it's manifested. Why did you publish this book together? What's the origin story of the concept of the book that's now out there?
Well, I was speaking. I've been a speaker for, I guess, 21, 22 years for a group called Family Life, Weekend to Remember. And we were in a city that has a really bad racial history. And a white couple, I think in 2008 or so, the wife said, who was white, she said, you and Gary had this great friendship. You guys ought to write a book and model that, because I think it would help a lot of people. And so I didn't think a big deal about it, but I thought it was a good idea. So I went to Gary, and Gary kept saying, I don't think I'm qualified. I said, yeah, you're qualified. And so he's really pretty humble. And but anyway, finally in 2017, he agreed to do it. And then with our schedules, we finally were able to write it. And then it was pushed back a year, which I was really upset about. But I do think now is the perfect time for it. But that's kind of how we came together. We got committed. I think he drafted a rough outline for the book, and we kind of went at it. So that's sort of how it came about. So it was really a couple of Roger and Gloria Henn. That was the idea, and I've dedicated the book to that couple, but it was their idea.
Yeah, and I think, I more and more can realize the situation that we were in today, and even asking myself, are we any better than we were in the late 60s? I certainly are in certain ways, to be sure, but still a lot of racial tension in our country, not just black, white, just right. Any cultures, but so I just really sensed, if we were ever going to do this, it was time to do it. And so we put our heads together and wrote the book. And our deep desire is that the hearts of those who read it will be touched by God, and they'll begin to think in terms of, maybe there's somebody I need to be reaching out to and could develop a friendship who's different from me. And then both of us enrich each other's lives.
Well, in prepping for today's call, I read the book over the course of the last week, and it really ministered to me, made me ask some questions about friendships I do or don't have in my life. And the challenge at the end is very powerful. Lawson, I think you're up for our next question. But before you go, I want to make sure that if a dad's listening to this interview, they know we're talking about, in case you dropped in the middle, we're talking about a new book by Gary Chapman and Clarence Shuler about life-changing cross-cultural friendships. Go get the book on Amazon. One of the things I'd love to say about the book is it's really brief. Like, you guys did a great job of packing it into not too many pages. And for our dad audience, that's actually super important that none of our dads want to read War and Peace, man. Just tell me how to do it. And so we really appreciate that. Lawson, what's next?
Yeah, I enjoyed the book on Audible. It was I thought it was rich to hear you both talk in your own voice and go through the book. So I got a lot out of that way. And I have a secondary interest in this topic because I get to serve on our corporation's diversity, inclusion, and belonging committee. So it's been helpful to me as well already in that capacity. But I do keep in mind that our audience is fathers who want to be a father on purpose. And I'm curious, in chapter 6, in fact, the whole chapter 6, you write about the word colorblind in the context of culture, race relations, and you know, how some people, perhaps with even good intent, unintentionally use that in a misleading way that can stimulate negative emotional response, with a whole chapter dedicated to it. Talk to our dads about, elaborate on why the word colorblind and that thought process, that approach that someone may have in their own mind to this issue, got its own full chapter.
Well, I think first I want to correct one thing Gary said. Gary said I was black. I'm really not black. I'm really pleasing brown. I just want to correct that.
Oh my word!
I just want to get that straight. But as a diversity consultant,
Clarence, we have two boys who were adopted from Ethiopia, and so obviously their skin is very dark. And one of them we call dark chocolate, because man, he's really really dark skinned, and one we call caramel, because he actually has a very light tone, but they're both black. But around our family, we find all kinds of labels for skin color around here. That may be good or bad. You can correct me.
Now, when you get close to people of different cultures, particularly people of color, we have a lot of fun with that. And so, but we'll talk about, that's a whole nother show. But the reason we talk about this thing colorblind is because there are people who are really well-intentioned. And I'll be doing diversity consulting, and almost in the very first session, typically a white guy will say, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. And I will say, that's great, that's tremendous. And then I'll ask them, well, what color is your shirt? And they'll say it's blue. I say, well, I'm confused. I say, if you're colorblind, how can you tell it's blue? And I say, well, and I said, now, as a Christian, help me here. And then they'll say, well, I just see everybody the same. And I said, well, I say, I'm really confused with that. I said, now, God has created us different. You're wearing different colored pants, you're dealing with, so what are you thinking? He says, well, I want to treat everybody the same. I said, well, that's really a good idea. I said, but everybody's really not the same. And I said, but for people of color, in fact, one of our potential endorsers for our book, we said something in the book, and we thought took it out of context, but they were really wounded. And they said, when you say colorblind, that's communicating to me that you don't see me.
Ooh, wow.
I think the other thing, when you say colorblind, are we all the same? And which color are we? So then it gets into the thing, are you talking about union, where everybody's the same? But sometimes, not all the time, sometimes union can be the enemy of unity. And so if you understand what you also talk about in the book, 1 Corinthians, and take the application, our differences create an interdependency, that we're not all the same. We have different strengths. And if we were in all church together, we'd all have different spiritual gifts, which I would need, and your gifts for me, and vice versa. So when we come together, interdependency, that creates a unity that glorifies God. So I think it's a really different perspective. So it's really important to understand that. And then some people use the term colorblind, do have some racial issues that they need to work through. And there are about 3 or 4 questions I can ask to kind of helps me determine them and help them see where they are. But that's why we really worked hard in talking about the term colorblind, because if we say we're colorblind, it can really be offensive, and we might not even know we're being offensive when we say that.
Gary, I want your comments, but before we get them on the topic colorblind, Clarence, there's a dad listening to this show, and he was driving down the road, and 5 minutes ago, he would have answered the question that same way. He just said, I'm colorblind. More than like, I got to imagine, of the thousands of dads who are going to listen to this show, a couple of them just went, wait a minute. What are 1 or 2 questions? You mentioned you might ask a few questions in your diversity training. What are 1 or 2 things you could say to that dad who's driving down the road? He hasn't read the book yet, which, go get the book. It'll make a lot more sense. What are 1 or 2 things you'd say to that dad right now, if you were sitting in the passenger seat, to help him kind of process through what you just said?
Well, if we were friends, I would ask him, why is he using the term colorblind? What is that trying to do for him? And how will use the term colorblind make him closer to someone who's of a different color that's obviously different? Why would he say that? And is it sort of the fear of the unknown? What is it? Or can he embrace the difference? So I would ask him a question like, if we were friends, if we weren't friends and just acquaintances, then I would say, wow, that's interesting that you're colorblind and use that term. But people are different complexions. How do you deal with that? Or what are you thinking when you say colorblind? So I would ask a question not to be ugly, but help him really articulate why he's using that term.
Gary, how about your reaction to that word colorblind?
Yeah. I think the other thing I would just make clear, and I think as you read the book, you see this clearly. We're giving people credit who say that. We know their intention is good, and so we're not trying to hit people on the head, but we're just saying you do need to think about that term because it has a different meaning to different people. So intentions are good. We just think there's a better way to express it.
Indeed. Let me pivot just a little toward your experience as dads yourselves. As fathers, you think back to your children. What impact did your friendship have on your own children?
Well, let me speak to that first because Clarence was coming to our house for Bible study and things when our kids were little. I mean, our kids were, I don't remember now, but they were still young in elementary school. So they saw him all the time, interface with him. And in fact, they came to see him as a brother. They called him their brother, when they were growing up, and still call him their brother now that they're grown. And so it was a very positive impact on them to realize that we can have friends, who are different from us. And then as they got older, they still call him brother. And his children call me grandpa.
Wait a minute. So hold on. I can't let that just go flying on by. So they call Clarence brother. They call you grandpa?
No. His kids call me brother.
His children call me grandpa.
All right. Okay. That's great. Clarence, how about you, man? How has your friendship affected your own children?
Well, what was really big, Gary invited me to his house. And that was like a big deal for people of color. When you invite to their house, hospitality is huge. And the further east you go in the world, hospitality is a big deal. So when he had me up to the house to have dinner with him and his kids, that was huge. And he was saying without saying to me, you're equal. And so when I watched the way he and Carolyn parented their kids, I started learning these things because he's older than I am. So he models stuff to me. And when we had kids, he actually wrote a letter of dedication to my twins that's in the book. That's huge. And so when we had kids, we began to model them after what we saw Gary and Carolyn doing, and also my parents as well. But here's the deal. When I'm in high school, and especially after becoming a Christian, I feel like I have two dads. I have my biological dad, who I love very much, who I got to lead to the Lord when I was 18. But my dad died when I was 20. So Gary really becomes not just my spiritual dad, but my physical dad for all practical purposes. I'd be at Moody Bible Institute and Gary's sending me money, say it's cold out there, buy you a sweater. Man. He was my dad. So the very natural thing when I had my kids, he became the grandfather.
Right.
In fact, there's a funny story. When we first come back to Carolina to see my parents and her parents, but also Gary and Carolyn, he grabs one of my twins, Christina, and runs through this cafeteria, telling all these predominantly white people in this thing that, hey, look at my grandchild. They're not just black kids. Hey, this is my grandchild. And I look at his wife, Carolyn, and she said, honey, and she is so cool. Carolyn's so cool. And she said, that's his first grandchild. And that was just a huge deal. It was.
Yeah, back then. I mean.
Yeah. But when Gary hits the house, when all our girls lived here, he hits the door and say, hey, grandpa's here, and they come flying down. So he really is been like a dad to me, even though he's not necessarily physically old enough to be my dad, but that's how we view him,
Man, so your kids grew up where just a cross-cultural friendship was normal, not even normal. It was just kind of the most important friendship of your life.
Yeah. And his daughter and son are like my brother and sister. And their kids, Shelly's kids are like my niece and nephew. So I send them, birthday cards and stuff like that too. So that's, so it's family.
Were there other men in your lives that saw what was going on with you two back then, or even since then, who saw it and then replicated it in their own life? Saw the example that you guys were setting. Not that you set out to set an example, but they saw you guys and maybe it impacted their own lives. Do you have stories of other men out there, other dads that you influenced?
I don't know, to be honest with you. Certainly was no conscious effort on our part to say, look at us and be like we are. I mean, I don't think either one of us even thought about that. And I don't know how many people were keenly aware of that. I think the college students that I was working with in those years in our church, and Clarence was a part of it, even though he was in high school, I think they saw it, and hopefully it had a positive impact on them. But I don't know in terms of other fathers, seeing that and how they may have been impressed. I don't know, Karen. I don't know, Clarence. Did anything else come to your mind?
No one that I know of, but we weren't the only ones. There's a dear friend of mine, a pastor out in Virginia, a guy named Bishop Courtney Macbeth, and he has an older white gentleman that he kind of grew up in the church there that was predominantly white. And, they have the same relationship Gary and I have. And they even do vacations together and stuff like that. So all their kids know each other. So we're not the only ones. I do think because ours might be now a little more high profile, there are other Black guys come to me and say, hey, I got a white guy in my life like that, or vice versa. And so we certainly weren't the only ones, but I think hopefully we'll encourage more people. But, back then, I don't think so. People that I know, I didn't know a lot of them.
It's interesting. We started adopting, let's see, Timothy just turned 11 and we got him when he was less than 1. So 10, 11 years ago. And so we accidentally, and we didn't set out to do this, but we accidentally got pulled into a community of people who all had international adoptions. And so now I have friends. Oh, when we get together with some of our friends, it looks like the United Nations, right? I mean, it literally does. We've had some Ethiopian Christmases where it's not just Ethiopian. You got white kids, you got Black kids, you got Indian kids from India, you get kids from China, all over the world. And so our kids have accidentally grown up in an environment where, while I don't have a lot of cross-cultural friendships myself personally that I hang with at my house, when we go to social events, we're bumping into a lot of cross cultures because the adoption wave kind of careened through our church, and there's dozens and dozens of families. And so, like you guys, I didn't set out to do that, and that wasn't our intent, but our kids would find that pretty normal. Let me ask you guys. I think one of the things you guys have both done throughout the course of your careers as speakers and authors and teachers is you've pastored a lot of people, whether that's directly at a church as an official pastor in the role, or it's kind of indirectly just through counseling and coaching. I'd like for you to take a few minutes on our podcast, and I want you to pastor the dad listening by audio. And here's the question I'd like for you to start from, but I'd like to spend a few minutes on this if you would. How important is it for us as dads to model cross-cultural friendships? What happens? How important of this is it for dads? What happens in our families? And what does it do for even our capacity perhaps to disciple our children? What kind of locks unlock when we do that as dads? And what would you say if you're riding down the road, because you kind of are, with a dad in the passenger seat, what would you tell dads? How important is it for us to model these cross-cultural friendships?
Well, I would say that as a boy growing up, my dad was a janitor for this company, but he had friends who were janitors who were white. And so I would come to see him sometime because I'd catch the bus from school and go where he was and ride home with him. And the fact he was talking to a white guy and they were talking back and they were friends, that spoke volumes to me. My dad didn't talk a lot, but to see him in that capacity said that white people, or at least some white people, are okay. And that just really meant a lot. And I think it kind of laid a foundation for when I met Gary. We didn't run into a lot of people who were of Gary's complexion who were nice to us, but it laid a foundation that I couldn't say or shouldn't say all white people are this way. There were exceptions to the rule. And so I think it's really important that we do that. But I think dads have such a great influence that they really don't realize that whatever dads do, research says about 90% of the family will follow dads in what they do, good or bad. And that's a huge influence that God has put into being a dad.
Clarence,
yeah,
Clarence, do me a favor, Clarence. Sorry, Gary, do me a favor, Clarence. Say that statistic again.
Well, one of my friends, a men's ministry guy, did some research, and the research shows very clearly that families tend to follow what 90% of the fathers do it's really a high percentage. Good or bad, they'll follow. That's the influence we have.
Wow.
And so when you read the scripture in Acts, when it talks about the Philippian jailer, he and his household, it makes more sense now because he was the spiritual leader and they naturally followed what he did. So our role as father is much more influential than we realize.
Yeah, and I would say our model is more impactful than our words.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when children growing up see the father having friendships with people of a different race or culture, it becomes the natural thing for them. You know, our kids, because of the experience that Clarence and I had, it was natural for them to reach out. And both of our children have friendships of people of different cultures and races. And now the grandchildren is the same thing because they're learning from their dad, you know. And so I just think it would have a tremendous impact on another generation if we could individually as fathers have, we just say have at least one really close friend of a different race or culture. I mean, imagine what would happen if every Christian father had at least one close personal friend and the children saw him and how they related with each other. I think it'd have a tremendous impact.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me share one story real quick. I was discipling kids in Chicago and I had them come to spend a week with me. And the church, Calvary had a church camp that particular week. So they were at this camp. There were only Black kids there out of 100 some kids. And Shelly, Gary's daughter, she made it her mission to make sure each one of those boys felt welcome. And she was about the only one who really did that, but she was the initiative. She really made sure that happened. And I think it's because of Gary and our relationship. And she saw Gary and me and whatever, but she did that on her own. And that really impressed me. That was really powerful.
Hey, Dad, do you wrestle with anger? Man, I sure have, and so have thousands of other dads in our email list. And so what we did for those dads and for you, we built a special digital course called The Anger-Free Dad. This digital course is chock full of almost 50 assets, a bunch of teaching videos, a ton of PDF booklets and worksheets, so you can walk through and understand your anger triggers, the expectations underneath, and how to pull those out of your heart and mind so you can be a dad who is less angry and more at peace. If you take this course and you do not become less angry, you will get all of your money back. Plus, we'll send you some boxing gloves so you can beat up the wall at your house with all of your mad anger. Dad, come take the Anger-Free Dad course today at manhoodjourney.org/anger-free-dad. That's manhoodjourney.org/anger-free-dad.
You know, Gary, you just said it. The call to action of the book, life-changing cross-cultural friendships, is you know, what if every Christian man out there sought out a cross-cultural friendship? What could happen? If you'd have said that to me, if you know, given me that challenge, call it 2 weeks ago, I would have approached that differently than I will now, having listened to your book. I have three, Ogana, Jared, and Larry. Larry Brown is actually, I would say, the reverse of you two. He's older, been a mentor to me, and what it made me want to do is not only go find others, but also to invest better than I have into those three. What did you set out to do with the book to create this challenge, and what do you think could come of people who, like me, are going to put more effort into that and demonstrate that, you know, in my own life? I think your book is going to have a big impact. How did that come about in your mind to create that challenge through the book?
Well, I think that was our heart from the beginning. That's really why we wrote the book, because we look back on our lives and realize what a tremendous impact we had on each other's life. And we thought, what if every Christian man had the kind of relationship we have with at least one person of a different race or culture? And that motivated us to write the book. And that's our prayer. That's our hope. And I know for some men, they may say, well, I'm too old now to do something like that. We're never too old to build friendships. And it, and we deal in the book also with different levels of friendship, and different types of friendship. But what we really are talking about is deep, close, long-term, friendships. For example, there are guys that have golf friends of a different race or culture. There's a little golf group, But if one of them drops out of the golf group, they might call the other person once or twice, but then they don't ever have contact. So it was a situational friendship, rather than a long-term personal friendship.
Right.
So, and I think the book's going to help guys see the difference between the different levels of friendship. And almost all of us have acquaintances. When you work, or your sports or your church, we have acquaintances of different races or cultures. But friendship's much different from an acquaintance. It's sharing life with each other on a close basis over a long period of time.
Yeah, well said. Clarence, how do you think the book prepares readers, like it did me, to accept the challenge?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how the difference. I would love to talk to you about the difference between where you were 3 weeks ago and where you are now. But I think one of the things that Gary and I really wanted to do, and especially because I do diversity consulting, was take the fear out of developing a cross-cultural friendship. And now, obviously, you don't have a fear, but there are a lot of people in the majority culture that have a fear of the unknown because they haven't been impacted, so they don't know what it's going to mean. So that's a real big deal. The other thing is I'm a research junkie, and in 95, sociologists said that by 2050 that the white race will cease to be majority in America. They've recently come out and say by 2042, but with the birth rate the way it is in America of cross-cultural relationships, is probably gonna be close to 2035, 2040. So I think it's really important that that we become like the men and women of Issachar and know what time it is. And so I think it's really, really important that we build these cross-cultural friendships, because when that shifts happen, we don't know what's going to happen. But if Christians are doing things between now and then, maybe that would help lower the racial tension in America. And that is one of the things, one of the motivations Gary and I had writing the book, is to improve race relations. And if we build friendships, even though we may be different politically or different theories, all stuff like that, our friendship should be more important than our political perspective. And I think that's what Gary and I are trying to do. And the friendship will cause us to ask the question and listen to our differences. And even if we learn how to agree or to disagree, we still are friends. So that's kind of our mindset behind writing the book. And those are just my thoughts in regards to that.
I'd like to talk about some ingredients, and I actually want to go where you were thinking, Clarence. Lawson, I'm going to give you a minute to think. But I'd like for you to articulate the difference. So hang on to that. Next question's coming your way, Lawson. But to your point, Clarence, I used to work for a company that ended up working with a lot of people from a lot of other countries. And I got smashed into a bunch of relationships with people who had very different approaches to work. Thankfully, they also had very different approaches to vacation, which was great because they loved to take time off. It was awesome. That's true. I mean, true story, man. True story. The Europeans know how to vacate. That was awesome. And
that's true.
Amen to that. And so one of the things you just touched on, though, was as the complexion, if I could use that term, as the complexion of our country, both from a race standpoint and even a skin standpoint, changes. As dads, we've got to acknowledge the fact that our children, if they live in America, are going to grow up in a more of a cross-cultural America than we grew up in. And so one of the things we're doing, if we're building cross-cultural friendships and teaching our children how, is enabling them to have more influence and more reach in the future as America's complexion changes. Would you say that's probably true given the stats you've seen?
Oh yeah, no doubt. And so I spent time with my girls when they were in high school, because I knew this was coming, preparing them to be the majority in America. And so I said, if you're going to become part of the majority culture in America, how are you going to treat the new minority. You know,
wow.
are you going to treat them the way you've been treated, sometimes mistreated? Or are you going to treat them the way they should be treated, the way God wants us to treat it? And that's a greater responsibility. And also, are you going to talk to people who look like you, who become part of the new majority, and how you treat the new minority? So there's a Christian respect and responsibility that we as fathers, you know, we need to be pro-visionaries and see down the road what's happening. And so when I do my diversity training, I challenge the white culture. What are you doing for your children and grandchildren? Prepare them to be part of the new minority in America. And if you're going to prepare them for that, how are you treating the minority in America today? And so, so all that impacts how we do as Christians and how we're going to glorify God in the midst of that. So I think it's really, really important that we understand that. So that's a byproduct of the book, to teach people how to create friends, even within your own race. Because I think Gary in his research found some people in their own culture who had no friends with anybody, period. You know, so that's, again, that's some of our thinking.
Well, and maybe this will actually challenge the dad listening. And Lawson, I'm going to turn it over to you in a second, and then we'll ask one last question of Gary and Clarence. But in page 56 of the book, one of the quotes I underlined, which I've actually shared with pretty much every member of my family over the last few days. I don't know which one of you guys wrote this, but I wrote this down because it was both really well written, but also very challenging.
That was probably me.
I'm sure we're gonna. Oh, sure. I'm sure you're right. Oh my God!
I'm sorry.
That's fantastic. The line is, it says, friendships will not develop between two selfish people. Oh my goodness! I read that and was like, huh. You know, that was page 56, and that made me struggle to read the next 100 pages because I thought, who are these two guys to tell me? No, because the truth of the matter is, right, whether it's cross-cultural or not cross-cultural, one of the key reasons we don't develop friendships is because we're just focused on ourselves. I think that goes for, you know, white friendships, black friendships, you know, American, non-American friendships. What are some ingredients? And then I'll kick it to you, Lawson. What are some ingredients? So you mentioned friendships won't develop between two selfish people. If a guy, again, a dad, I want to focus on the dad, and I want to focus on something he can walk away from today's episode and use relatively quickly. What is, maybe Gary and Clarence, you guys take turns. What is one thing you would say, hey man, if you want to build cross-cultural friendships, number one, go read the book. Go get the book, Life-Changing Cross-Cultural Friendships. It's going to make it a lot easier. But if they don't read the book between now and the next week from now, what is one thing that dad can do? Not be selfish would be maybe a starting point. But Gary or Clarence, what's a thing they could do? What's an ingredient that they could start to stir into the mix to help them build these cross-cultural friendships?
Well, I think one, just playing off of the word you just talked about, is to just self-analyze yourself, because love is the opposite of selfishness. Love is approaching all of life with the attitude, I want to enrich the lives of the people that I encounter. And selfishness approaches life with the attitude of, I'm going to see what I can get out of this. And so just, you know, asking yourself in the presence of God to help you just see kind of where you are on the continuum, because all of us lean, you know, in one direction or the other. And then asking God to warm your heart and give you the same heart that Jesus had when he was here, you know, and the same heart that God, the Father, has in wanting his children to reach out and love other people, regardless of race or culture. So to me, that just the time with God, you know, talking to God about that and thinking about that in your own life would begin, I think, the process of moving you maybe in a different direction.
And I was piggyback on that. Another thing Gary and I talk about is what he just did. We need to pray and ask God to give us cross-cultural friendships. Ask God to prepare our hearts for cross-cultural friendships and to learn from that. I think the other thing we need to understand, and the Bible talks about this, we need to be friendly. You know, being friendly attracts other people. We can initiate, you know, when Gary met me, he came over, initiated, say, I'm this, you know, glad you're here. And so I'm just doing this a lot today, and it's amazing. I'll comment and just say a friendly thing to people and they respond. So I think we need to do that. I think we need to show respect. I think we need to serve. When Jesus went and met the woman at the well in Samaria, he broke a lot of religious traditions, but he went to her and he really served her. And I think it's important. I think it's important if you develop a relationship, is to learn about the other culture. So, but I think the place to start though is showing respect, being sensitive, being friendly, praying about it. Those are some of the main ingredients or first step ingredients to building cross-cultural friendship.
And maybe that's how you've changed. You would have changed, Lawson, is you would have gone from being unfriendly to friendly finally. Is that the change you were talking about?
No, look, I love our country. I think you're right. I think this would be, we're in a time now where this is super important. That's one of the takeaways from this book is it's given it more of a purpose than just, if it happens, it happens. I think it is a challenge. Let's go do this. Let's pray about how this can come into our lives in a new way, or in like with my case, a better way. Ogana and I are on the Diversity, Inclusion, Belonging Council together. I've not met him. He's in California. We're going to see each other in person next month at a meeting. And I'm going to invest in our friendship between now and then so that when we're there together, we can set an example and have a little more relational history together. I just saw Jared this past week. He and I did some work raising awareness about military veteran causes over time, and we've gotten real close over the last 6-7 years, and it was just great to see him again. Larry, who was a mentor in my life for a long time, 20 years now. Haven't talked to him in too long, and your book motivated me to invest in all three of these friendships in a better way because now I feel I understand the importance of it from a patriotic standpoint, from a company standpoint, and from my family. But I haven't. I think what you've called me to do is to be more prayerful and more purposeful in it, because there is a higher cause. There is a greater need than I think I would have realized a couple of weeks ago. And so I believe your book, and I believe our time together today is affecting people. They are listening to this. I pray that guys will go get your book. In my case, I did Audible. It's a 3.5-hour listen. I loved hearing you two talk it through. It felt richer to me because I could hear your own voice. So I do want to end with, so thinking about the person listening to us right now, what is the one thing that you'd like to leave our dads with as we close out? And before I turn it over to you two, from me to you, just thank you so much for what you've done in my own life. I think it's going to affect my family. It's going to affect my friendships. And I believe that what God called you to do is going to help our country as well in this critical time. So I'll turn it over to you and just ask, what is something that you'd like to leave our dads with?
Well, Lawson, first of all, and forgive me for taking so long, I want to thank you for your military service. And I want to thank every dad listening to this. Thank all of you for your military service. And the way you love the country, Lawson, and I'm listening to you, when you're told to do something as a Marine, you go do it. And so my prayer is that it's not just Gary me saying this. I pray this is God calling you. And so I'm praying for every dad who knows Jesus. They'll feel a calling to now I need to help lead my family in developing cross-cultural relationships. And so another thing that you guys do that we always thank you for in the military is the quality of life you allow us to live here in America. And that's because of what you have sacrificed and are willing to sacrifice. So if you do that same thing and build cross-cultural relationships, I think you can really improve the quality of life in America, not just today, but in next 3 or 4 generations. So that's what I'd like to say to dads.
Yeah, and I would just add, don't let the busyness of life keep you from doing something that I hope you're beginning to see is so important. all of us are busy, and we can just say, well, I don't have time to develop a friendship. Well, what's really important in life, it's not position, it's not wealth, it's not things, it's relationships. First of all with God, and then with other people. And other people includes people of other races and cultures as well.
Well, Clarence Shuler and Gary Chapman, you guys have been a huge blessing to us for a long time. I've known Clarence about 4 or 5 years now, and every time I see or interact with him, he offered to pray for my son last summer as I walked through a really challenging summer. And Clarence was quick to be in my email inbox to offer to pray. You guys are the real deal. And Gary, I've of course, known about you and seen you in different venues and read your books and the work you guys have done for 50 years plus with your friendship and with your written and spoken content. Amazing. Thank you guys for investing in us as believers and husbands and wives. And thank you guys for taking some time today to spend on the Father on Purpose podcast and encourage our dads. We really, really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Dads, go get the book, Life-Changing Cross-Cultural Friendships, or you will be destined to a life of shallow, meaningless activity. Go get the book. Go, just kidding. Go get the book. It's a quick read. You'll love it. And maybe as Lawson did, go listen to it on audio so that you can hear the silky smooth voices of Gary Chapman and Clarence Shuler as they go. Guys, thanks a lot. And dads, we will see you next week with a fresh episode of the Father on Purpose podcast. God bless you guys. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.